the musician who plays to an empty bar, the poet who nearly has to scream over room chatter, and the visual artist who posts their work online to receive 0 views. How exactly is it that we creators stay interested in sharing our work when others aren't exactly interested? Howdy Creative Cats! Through creative conversations, we look at topics to help creatives like you make stuff that matters. If you're interested in more creative videos, click the link right here and we'll move on up. First, it takes an enormous amount of courage just to get the guts to share your work to the public. It in itself can be an intimidating experience, no matter how experienced you are in sharing your work. Then you finally get the courage to get out there and maybe share your music or share your poem, table your artwork, but it falls to the crickets. This is a common experience among many artists of all kinds. Not everybody values creativity, the arts, or your specific niche. In fact, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, scrapped millions of dollars on arts funding, saying that ordinary working people can't relate to rich artists attending galas. You can decide for yourself if that's accurate or not, but his opponents at the time noted that the arts isn't about receptions and artists aren't exactly rich. Despite funding, it seems artists are consistently trying to justify or explain what it is that they do. Many students are discouraged from enrolling in arts programs because they're seen as impractical and don't lead to secure employment. But then there's an apathy among familiar faces. We can all think of an artist who didn't become recognized until after their death. Van Gogh, Monet, and many more. But even among family members, sometimes artists aren't recognized until after they receive media attention. Jack White of the White Stripes explains leaving Detroit for Nashville because the artistic environment seemed cynical and he found it difficult to create in. After the White Stripes broke through the mainstream, Jack White said, "It was very difficult for me to understand." He said, "When you win the lottery, what do? You give your brothers and sisters $1 million. If you win the lottery, they're going to end up hating you a couple of years later." Even if folks do appreciate art, people lead busy lives, and it can be difficult to capture their attention on an ever-crowded and filtered social media landscape. Artists are often left treating their work as a business instead of focusing on the work itself. So how do we deal with uninterested audiences? Here's some advice from actual creators themselves. Toronto rapper Reality says, "Just keep putting it out regularly and try different things. If they're not interested, it's probably because you're not as good as you think you are. But when you stay steady and get better, and it becomes really good, people will have no choice but to notice." Poet and writer Yumna Sonia says,
for example, working for a newspaper or a website where you're working on a journalistic piece, you work really hard on it, you submit it, you get it published. With hard copy, it's hard to get any feedback. Someone might say like, "Oh, I saw your piece in the newspaper," you might get that 1 or 2 times. Generally, you're just going to get the kudos from your editor, from whoever, is publishing your work. So there's that validation. If I've tweeted something that I've published or I posted something that I've published, it becomes like this waiting game. Oh, how many likes am I getting? How many comments am I getting? It feels like this desire for like a shallow validation. So I think there's that feeling that an artist feels like they need to overcome is like, oh, like, am I being shallow? But it's also a very real desire for validation because it's also a sign of success in the world that we live in today. So it's a very complicated feeling and relationship with our work. When you see the numbers, there's this sinking feeling like, is my work being read or seen? Is it being witnessed? And like, a witness or an observer is so important because if I work really hard on something and my publisher is the only one who I feel like has really, really looked into it, it almost feels like it was pointless. And that's what you have to overcome, is that feeling of pointlessness. In terms of insight on how artists can overcome this, I think it's just consistency. It's not caring. And that's the hardest thing because a lot of the time, even when we're creating our work, we have to try very hard not to think about the eventual, viewing of the art. So I think consistency, perseverance, just not getting too wrapped up in the thought that no one cares. So kind of like a YOLO attitude.
From Durham region artist at Potted Plant Dad on Instagram. Yeah, that happens all the time. I feel like it builds up and you have to think about where your audience is, I guess. I feel I'm a little savvier with that these days. I mostly share my art online, so I have some anonymous platforms where I get some, not much attention. What works for me, because my art is so varied in themes, interests, styles, and mediums, I've created different platforms where I've, in a way, made subcategories for where I post my art. It always depends on which audience it would appeal to after I've made it. I've looked at different social media platforms where I found like-minded people to interact with and to mutually support each other. It takes time, it's a growing process. Go find your people. Toronto-based vocalist and songwriter Kestrel Blue says,
I think artists can learn a lot from athletes, actually. Athletes often talk about playing their system or focusing on their game, which is another way of saying that they worry more about executing their performances skillfully than worrying about the result. So you can't control whether you win or lose, finish first or 40th beyond your own performance. So I would tell artists to play their system, execute as best you can at your art and at your self-promotion, but let go of what you can't control, people's tastes and interests.
Whatever works best for you, remember there is usually a lot more to your art than the audience. Try asking yourself what that is. My name's Sarah. If you'd like to participate in more creative conversations, consider subscribing. And until next time, keep making stuff that matters.